Dawn crept over the winter plains like a tired hand brushing light across a world that had almost given up. Frost clung to every blade of grass, every fence post, every forgotten memory. And along the frozen road, an old woman and a boy walked behind a mule-dragged wagon that held nothing but a patched quilt, a skillet, and the last scraps of a life undone. If you had been there, if you had stood in that pale, breath-white morning, you would have seen the shape of hope in the tiny way the boy held her hand, and the shape of sorrow in how tightly she held back. Ellie Harper kept her chin up despite the aching cold, though every step reminded her of all the nights she'd whispered promises she wasn't sure she could keep. Her grandson Jonah trudged beside her in boots too thin for winter, his small breaths trembling in the air. When the town finally appeared, a cluster of wooden buildings hunched against the wind, Ellie paused, brushed snow from her shawl, and whispered, "Be brave, Jonah. Just a little longer." The townsfolk noticed them before she could speak to anyone. Heads turned. Whispers slipped under doors and around corners as quickly as snowdrifts. Women carrying baskets slowed their steps. A ranch hand leaned on a hitching post and stared. Ellie felt their eyes the way a wounded animal feels the cold, unavoidable, piercing. She guided Jonah toward the mercantile, shoulders squared, voice steady even though her heart rattled like loose nails. Inside, warmth and suspicion hit them simultaneously. Maeve Dalton, who ran the place with a sharp smile and sharper tongue, eyed Ellie from behind the counter. "Help you?" she asked, the way some folks ask if you're planning to steal. Ellie folded her trembling hands. "I'm looking for work. Temporary. I can cook, mend, clean, anything honest." Maeve's eyebrows lifted. She looked at Jonah, her face softening for a heartbeat before sharpening again. We don't need help right now." Her gaze flicked toward a pair of women near the shelves, the kind who whispered behind gloved fingers. One of them murmured something that made Maeve tighten her jaw. Ellie bowed her head slightly. "I understand. Thank you." She walked Jonah outside, her breath shaking harder than the cold warranted. His hand tightened around hers, and she swallowed the shame that rose in her throat like a bitter winter root. "It's all right," she whispered. "We keep trying." They visited the livery, the bakery, even the tiny church. Each time the answer was the same: pity in their eyes, rejection in their voices. The town wasn't unkind, not exactly. It was scared. People protect what little they have in a land where the wind itself seems hungry enough to take it. By midday, Ellie felt the ache of failure settling deep into her bones. Jonah sat on a crate outside the mercantile, his small fingers tucked under his arms for warmth. Snow flurries danced in the air like little reminders of how quickly warmth could vanish. Sheriff Ryland Graves approached, boots crunching. He wasn't a cruel man, but he wasn't the type to soften his words either. "Heard you're looking for a place," he said. Ellie nodded. "Just shelter. Just for the winter." He scratched his chin. "Ain't much spare room in town. Folks are wary these days." His voice lowered. "But if you got nowhere else, there's Silas Boone. Lives up on Ridge Hollow." Ellie frowned. The name stirred a few whispers she remembered hearing inside the mercantile. "Is he dangerous?" "Not dangerous," the sheriff replied. "Just alone too long. People talk. But he's got a warm cabin and more land than sense. Might take you in if he's feeling charitable." Ellie looked down at Jonah. The boy's cheeks were red from cold, his eyes dull with exhaustion. She had no right to drag him farther into hardship, no right to gamble his well-being on a stranger in the mountains. But she had no choice either. They left town as the sky turned a softer shade of gold. The path toward Ridge Hollow wound through dense pines heavy with snow. The mule struggled. Jonah's breath wheezed. Ellie murmured the tune her daughter once hummed while sewing by lamplight. Memories tugged at her. Her girl's laughter, her girl's frailty in that final winter, her promise whispered over a cooling hand. "I'll keep him safe." The promise weighed heavier than the snow. By the time they reached the cabin, dusk had begun settling between the branches. Smoke curled from the chimney in a thin line, the only sign the place was lived in. Ellie hesitated at the doorstep, lifted her hand, then let it fall again. Knocking felt like asking the world for one more thing after already taking too much. But Jonah nudged her, his eyes trusting though tired. She knocked. The door opened slowly. A tall man filled the frame, broad-shouldered, hair unkempt, beard thick, eyes unreadable. Silas Boone looked like someone carved out of the very ridge he lived on. Rough edges, cold surface, unmoving. Ellie swallowed. Sir, we lost everything. Winter took our home. And our girl. We have nowhere left. Could we, just for a little while, could we stay? Silas didn't speak. He just stared, long enough that Ellie felt each second as a separate wound. Jonah shifted behind her, hiding half his face in her coat. Then Silas stepped aside. No words, no gesture, just room to enter. Inside the cabin, warmth wrapped around them gently, like a blanket someone forgot to shake the loneliness out of. The space was simple. Hand-carved table, fire glowing in a stone hearth, a rocking chair patched more than once, shelves lined with tools, jars, and a few books worn from weather rather than reading. Jonah drifted toward the stove. Silas noticed his thin boots and placed a fur pelt on the floor near him without explanation. Jonah sat instantly, pressing his hands into the warmth. Ellie cleared her throat. I can cook if you'd like. Or clean. We don't mean to be a burden. Silas nodded once, as much permission as she would get. As she prepared a simple stew from the dry beans Silas pointed to, she felt his eyes on her, not judging, not welcoming, just watching, trying to understand what had arrived at his door. Ellie's hands trembled as she sliced onions. Silas noticed. He didn't comment. Instead, he poured hot water into a metal cup and set it on the table near her. She froze for a moment. Small kindnesses hit hardest when they're unexpected, then gave him a quiet, grateful nod. The evening settled around them like snow. Jonah fell asleep curled on the pelt, and Ellie sat by the fire, rubbing warmth back into her fingers. Silas sat across the room, working on a wooden handle for an axe, each slow stroke of the blade against wood echoing through the stillness. They didn't speak, but something unspoken passed between them, a fragile, uncertain thread. The kind that grows when wounded people share the same shelter, the same silence, the same longing for a place where the cold finally stops reaching them. Ellie closed her eyes, her heartbeat slow and tired but steady. For the first time in a long while, she let hope warm her just a little. Winter thickened its grip on Ridge Hollow in the days that followed. But inside the cabin, something gentler began to take root. Quiet routines, small exchanges, moments that stitched themselves into comfort before any of them realized it. Ellie rose early to warm the hearth. Silas chopped wood before dawn. Jonah followed his quiet footsteps like a shadow, learning how to be brave again. The world outside remained a frozen, indifferent wilderness, but somehow, within those log walls, the air felt warmer than the fire alone could claim credit for. Silas wasn't a man who used many words, but his gestures were their own language. If Ellie struggled to reach a pot, he shifted it without looking directly at her. If Jonah coughed at night, Silas would toss an extra blanket onto the boy's small frame. He fixed the broken hinge on the wagon without being asked. He sharpened Ellie's old kitchen knife until it sliced onions with barely a sound. And when Jonah laughed, really laughed, at the sight of Silas slipping a pancake as he flipped it too fast, something in Silas's eyes softened like thawing river ice. But peace in the mountains carried the same fragility as early spring. One harsh wind could undo progress. One whisper could chill the warmest hearth. Word of their stay reached town faster than melting snow could reveal the dirt beneath it. Maeve Dalton, never one to let a quiet story remain quiet, began shaping it into something worth spreading. She's taking advantage of Silas, she said behind the counter, loud enough for customers to hear. Poor man's too soft to send her away. Soft. Silas Boone. The idea made men laugh and women nod knowingly, as if Silas was some naive bachelor who didn't know better. The stories worsened by the week. By the time Sheriff Graves rode up to the cabin one afternoon, Ellie had already sensed the shift in the air, the way people looked at Silas when they rode past, the subtle worry on the sheriff's face. He dismounted slowly, hands tucked in his coat. Ellie, he said gruffly. Mind if I speak with you? She stepped outside, wrapping her shawl tighter. Jonah peeked from the window behind her. Graveside. Folks in town are talking, saying you're a burden on Silas. Saying, well, that you came here to trap him. Make him responsible for you. Ellie felt the sting of shame travel through her like a cold draft. I never meant to cause trouble. I just had nowhere left. I know, Graves replied gently, but rumors have a way of growing. Silas is a private man. Last thing he needs is gossip stirring up old wounds. Ellie nodded because she understood. Her presence, her needs, were becoming a weight on a man who carried enough ghosts of his own. After the sheriff left, she lingered outside as the sky grayed, letting the cold numb the ache building inside her. That night, after Jonah fell asleep, Ellie sat by the fire while Silas whittled something in the corner. She watched the way lamplight touched the scar on his cheek, the way his hands, so capable and steady, shaped the wood grain into something gentle. Silas, she whispered, voice low so Jonah wouldn't hear. We should go. His knife paused mid-stroke. Why? It's not right for us to stay. We're causing you trouble down in town. People think I'm taking advantage of your kindness. Silas didn't look up. His jaw tightened, the fire throwing shadows across his face. People talk 'cause they got nothing worth saying. Maybe, she said softly, but Jonah and it's not fair to bring your name into it. He set the knife down, slow and deliberate. When he finally lifted his eyes, something raw flickered in them. You ain't taking that boy back into the cold. The words hit her harder than anger would have. He wasn't scolding. He was protecting, maybe even pleading. But Ellie shook her head, tears pushing against her eyelids. She turned toward the fire, unsure whether she could speak without breaking. The mountain had grown quiet by the time they slept, the kind of quiet that feels too fragile to trust. Then the storm came. Wind roared through Ridge Hollow with a voice like the world tearing itself apart. Snow whipped against the cabin windows in hard, relentless sheets. Ellie rose before dawn to feed the fire, but Jonah's blanket lay empty, rumpled, cold, alone. Her stomach dropped. Jonah, she called, frantic. No answer. She ran to the door, heart pounding, flung it open, and felt the storm claw at her face. Snow already ankle-deep, blowing sideways. Her boy's footprints, small, wandering, led into the white blur of the forest. Silas, she screamed, voice cracking. He's gone. Jonah's gone. Silas was on his feet before the echo faded. No panic, just sudden, fierce purpose. He grabbed his coat, rifle, lantern. His boots hit the floorboards with heavy finality before he stepped into the storm. Stay here, he said. His voice cut through the wind like a blade. I'll bring him home. Ellie tried to follow, but the cold stabbed her lungs. Within minutes her legs shook, her body too frail to push through the storm's fury. Silas turned back once, lantern glow flickering across his determined expression. I'll find him, he repeated, softer this time, almost tender. I promise. Then he disappeared into the storm. The world shrank to the sound of wind and Ellie's heartbeat. She collapsed beside the cabin wall, clutching her shawl, whispering her daughter's name. Lydia, please watch over him, while snow gathered on her skirts. She could do nothing but wait, pray, and break in silence. The storm swallowed the ridge, but Silas moved through it like a man born of harsher winters. He followed the faint prints until they led toward the frozen creek, a place where the ice was thin even in deep cold. His lantern swayed, casting shaky circles of light. Then he heard it, a faint cry. Mr. Silas? Jonah stood near the middle of the creek, where the snow disguised the danger. The ice beneath him groaned, cracking in spiderweb lines. Don't move, Silas ordered, dropping to his knees. Jonah's chin quivered, eyes wide with fear. I thought I saw my mama's light. Silas's chest tightened, but his voice stayed steady. I know, son. I know, but you gotta stay still. He crawled across the ice inch by inch, every movement deliberate. The storm screamed around them. The creek hissed and cracked. Jonah whimpered as the ice dipped under his weight. When Silas reached him, He extended his arms slowly. "Come here." Jonah lunged the moment he felt safe. The ice split. Silas grabbed him, pulling the boy against his chest just as the frozen sheet behind them shattered into dark, freezing water. The cold shot up Silas's legs like knives, but he held Jonah tight, turning his body so the boy stayed dry. He climbed back toward solid ground one breath at a time, teeth clenched, boots slipping. By the time he returned to the ridge, Jonah clinging to his neck, Silas's body shook from cold and exhaustion, but the fire inside him burned ferociously. Ellie saw them through the storm's veil and collapsed to her knees, arms outstretched. She gathered Jonah to her chest, sobbing into his wet hair. Silas staggered, bracing a hand on the cabin wall. Ellie reached for him without thinking, placing her hand over his, her eyes full of gratitude and something deeper, something that frightened them both with its intensity. "You saved him," she whispered. Silas shook his head, breath ragged. "Boy saved himself. Just needed a little help coming home." Inside, Ellie bundled Jonah with dry blankets. Silas, near hypothermic, tried to sit by the fire but nearly fell. Ellie knelt beside him, rubbing warmth back into his hands. When she looked up, their faces were inches apart, close enough to feel the shared heartbeat of this fragile family forming in the shadows. He whispered, barely audible, "Don't leave." And Ellie understood then. Not all loneliness is chosen. Some of it is endured until someone unexpected walks through the door, carrying their whole world in a boy's small hand. Spring came slowly to Ridge Hollow. Snow melted in patient rivulets. Grass pushed through cold earth. Birds returned to branches Silas thought would never see color again. One morning, Ellie stepped outside to find Silas building a second room onto the cabin, measuring beams, setting support posts, working with a quiet purpose that needed no announcement. When she approached, he didn't stop hammering. He just said, "Figure you two ought to have space of your own. Cabin's been lonely long enough." Ellie felt tears warm her cheeks, but this time they weren't from sorrow. Jonah ran past her, laughing as he carried a handful of nails to Silas, calling the cabin home without hesitation. Silas looked at Ellie then, a rare, soft smile tugging at his rough features. "Reckon we needed each other more than any of us knew." And in the golden hush of the afternoon light, Ellie believed him. If you're listening now, if you've walked through your own winter, you should know this. Family isn't always born. Sometimes it's found in the quiet grace of someone who chooses to open their door. Dignity grows like spring grass, slow, tender, but unstoppable once the thaw begins. And sometimes the warmest place in the world is a home built by wounded hands learning, at last, how to hold others gently.